how to start watercolor painting. In today's video, I'm going to give you my 10 recommended starter colors. If you've just started painting, this is going to enable you to mix a wide range of colors. And if you've been painting for a little while, you'll be able to look at this checklist and see if you have all of these really useful colors. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Michele, and on this channel you'll find all things watercolor and a little bit of mixed media too. Please do consider subscribing. If you click the bell icon, you can get notified every time I have a new video for you. I make one free video a week here on YouTube on a Thursday with extra content on Saturdays for my Patreon subscribers. So in a moment I'll point the camera downwards and I'll demonstrate each of these colours in turn and show you what you can do with them and what they are good for. But let's talk briefly about beginner's sets and what you can expect from a beginner's set. So most beginner's sets encompass primary colours and a few earth colours, and some of the larger beginner's sets will also encompass some secondary colours. So with a general small beginner's set, what you will get is a warm and cool version of each of the primary colours. That's red, blue and yellow. However, primary colours are not fixed, and there is no one set of primary colours. So without going, for hours and hours on about colour theory, let me briefly explain to you that there are three ideas of what the primary colours are and why no primary set in the world will enable you to mix every single colour. So you've got three types of primaries. You have scientist primaries. This is looking at levels of light and refraction of light. And this is called subtractive colour mixing. So what you can do if you're a scientist is you can take some green light and you can extract the yellow from it. That's really cool, isn't it? Can't do that as an artist, can you? So we have additive colour mixing. So your scientist primaries might be red, blue and green, but your artist primaries are red, blue and yellow. And that's because we need to mix the yellow and the blue together to get our green. Let's complicate it further. Then you have printer's primary colours. So that's CMYK. So that's cyan, magenta, yellow. We've got the primaries again there, you see. And then they have the K, which is key, which is actually black. Now, I've seen a lot of discussion recently on painters forums saying that, if CMYK are the colours that printers use and they can print any colour, then if we could copy those in our beginner's palette of watercolours, then we could mix every colour. This is absolute nonsense. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but it's absolute nonsense because CMYK cannot mix any colour. And if you had been involved, as I have been, in designing paint colours and paint sets for years and making colour mixing leaflets, you would understand that CMYK has its limitations as well, and this is why Pantone colours exist. You'll have to Google that if you want to know more about Pantone. So if you start with magenta, for example, you are never going to get the beautiful, most bright orange there is. So the way that beginners sets do this is, they have the warm and cool version of each of the primaries and a few basic neutrals. And this really is the best way of giving you the largest colour mixing range that there is. But please understand that certain colours only exist as natural or synthetic single pigments and simply cannot be mixed by mixing primaries together. In fact, primaries do a really bad job of mixing things like earth colours, which is why most beginners sets include those earth colours, even though technically you can mix browns and greys from your primaries. So, without confusing any further, I'm going to start going through the list of the 10 that I think that you should be starting with. Now, please don't leave me a load of hate in the comments if you disagree with this list. There is no right and wrong with art. There is only my opinion, and my opinion is built on 20 years of teaching real life classes. And these are the colours that I have found to be the most useful. Now, in certain cases, for certain ones of these colours, I'm going to give you several variations because it isn't necessary for you to have that exact colour, only one that's like it. So let's get on and let's look at the primaries first, and let's look at the idea of having a cool yellow. I would say that this is essential for any painter's palette. So just before we start the swatches, I'll tell you about the materials I'm using because you all always want to know what materials I'm using. So this is actually a set of paints that I designed myself. So this is the Essentials set made in the UK by Jackman's Art Materials, and it comes with this free colour mixing guide where I tell you how to mix another 20 colours from these basic colours. However, this tutorial can be followed with any brand of paint, and where appropriate, I'm going to give you alternatives to the colours that I'm using here. Most of them are basic colours that we found across any brands, but the ones that are not, I'll give you alternatives that are almost identical, so you'll be able to buy these paints from any brand. So this is your cool yellow. See how bright it is. Now, this one is Hansa Yellow, but a very similar one would be Lemon Yellow. Another colour that you could use would be Cadmium Lemon. So any of those light kind of green based yellows, you want this bright cool yellow. And The most useful thing for a yellow like this is that it will mix you some really, really bright greens. So let me add a little bit of blue to it, and we'll talk about the blue later on. And we can get a really great bright green. So this is your light bright yellow, and I would say this is absolutely essential in every set. So this is Hansa Yellow, but you can use lemon yellow or cadmium lemon yellow. So you've got your cool yellow. Let's look now at a warm yellow, and you really have quite a few options for your colour choices here. So the colour I'm swatching now for you is Diarylide Yellow. There are actually quite a lot of warm yellows. The closest one to this would be probably a cadmium yellow deep, or at a push you could use an Indian yellow. Now this type of yellow is going to be really useful for mixing things like oranges, and it's also going to mix a different type of green. So if you mix a warm yellow like this, you're going to get a much warmer, duller, sort of more mossy green. So let's look at the difference. Still quite a bright green, but you can see that it's not got that cool blueness to it. It's much more warm, heading into those lime greens. So by having one cool and one warm yellow, you're going to get a massive range of greens, and this is just the start. You can mix them with all sorts of blues, and you can go lighter or darker, more into the yellow or more into the blue, to get a massive range of greens just from these two yellows. So we've looked at the yellows. Let's look now at the next primary colour, which is blue. Now I've spoken in other videos about why I don't believe that it's accurate to describe some blues as warm blues and some blues as cool blues, because actually all blues are cool, and they can tend towards the red end of the spectrum, warm, or they can tend towards the yellow end of the spectrum, also warm. But the ones that are commonly, by artists at least, it's completely the opposite in fashion actually, but the ones that are commonly described by artists as cool would be your yellow or green leaning blues. And that's actually how the manufacturers describe them. So it's much more accurate to describe your blues as red-based or green-based rather than warm or cool, which isn't really very accurate. But I'm talking here about your teal blues, your aquas, all of those blues that sort of tend into those lovely sea colours. So what we're looking at now is looking at a green-based blue to add to your palette. So we're actually going to swatch now the blue that I put in with my yellows, and this is Phthalo Blue Green shade. So this is a lovely, soft turquoise sky blue. So this colour is going to be most useful for painting skies, but it also will make some nice lilac colours. So I'm going to put a little bit of pink in with it. And here we get a nice, soft lilac. Now it's actually quite unusual to find Phthalo blue in a small beginner's set. It may be in some of the larger beginner's set. The one that you're most likely to have in your beginner's set, if you've purchased a different brand to this, will be cerulean blue, so you can use cerulean as well. I chose the Phthalo blue because I actually wanted a stronger colour, because otherwise there's no staining colour in your beginner's set. So I wanted that colour strength. So cerulean is good as well. You can also use something like the Daniel Smith Manganese Blue Hue. So you want this light, bright, turquoise-based blue. So now you've got your green-based blues, we're going to need a red-based blue. So let me tell you why you need it and what you can use it for. So I'm now swatching French Ultramarine, but any Ultramarine will be fine in your beginner's set. So if you've got a beginner's set that's got Ultramarine or French Ultramarine, there's very little difference between them. French Ultramarine tends to lead a little bit more to the purple, but you can see it's a much different animal to that turquoise blue. And a blue like this is really important because it's very helpful for mixing strong purples, because it's almost purple itself. So I'll add some pink to this one and you'll see what we get. At this point, if you're getting some value from this video, can I ask you for a quick favour? Could you please click that thumbs up, that like button, please? YouTube rewards channels with audience interaction, so if you like, subscribe, share, or even leave me a comment, YouTube will push this video out to more people and it helps my channel to grow so I can teach more people how to paint. So here we're getting quite a nice strong purple. Less lilac and with a bit more depth to it. Another really good use for your ultramarine blue is for making very natural greens. So when you're looking at blue and yellow, you're looking at two of the primary colours. If you introduce the third primary colour, which is red, you start to dull the colour. Now because ultramarine naturally has a touch of red in it, it means that you're going to get a dull green. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So let me show you what happens when I mix ultramarine with the Hansa. And we start to get much duller, more muted greens. Really can be very useful in landscape painting. One little bit of advice I would give you for the ultramarine is do be very careful as a beginner using it in skies. It's a heavy colour, it granulates, it means it's got little speckles in, and it really can be overdone in skies. So if you are going to use ultramarine in skies, I suggest you use it very watered down and very carefully. But really for beginners, I tend to advise them to avoid ultramarine in skies. So we've done the first two primaries. What's left? Of course, it's red. And the first red I want you to have in your palette is actually a pink-based red. And not only that, but it's a cool pink. So I actually think this is such an essential colour for every palette that I did a whole video about it. I'll put it up in the information cards above. If you can't see it there because it doesn't show on all devices, do pop into the video description and I will list it there. So this type of pink, this blue-based pink, this cool pink, is absolutely vital for colour mixing. Let me show you what you can do with it. So the colour I'm swatching for you now is a fabulous bright pink, and this is Permanent Rose. Now your other options for a pink would be something like a quinacridone rose. At a push you can use a madder or an alizarin crimson, but alizarin crimson tends to be a rather dirty, sort of duller colour, and it's more of a red pink than this one. So I would try and get yourself a proper bright light pink. Really, really useful for colour mixing. As we have seen, it makes these lovely purples. It can also be used to dull down greens. So let me show you what I mean. So here's one of the greens we made at the start. Lovely light bright green. And because red is the opposite colour to green, let me show you what happens when I put pink in. Now I could just put a scarlet red in, but actually it wouldn't have quite the same effect. It would tend to go rather brown. Here we are. I can just pop that in, and you see how I neutralise that, start pushing it more towards a sort of a grey green. So pink is a really, really useful colour for mixing. It can also be used if you mix it with a little bit of yellow and some blue. It can also be used to mix greys. So as we discussed in the beginning when we were talking about the printer's colours and magenta, a pink can't mix you every colour that you ever need in terms of having that red in your palette. So we're going to look now at something that's also very important, and that's a scarlet based red. So the colour I'm swatching for you now is called Pyrrole Red. So you can see this is a lovely bright scarlet based red. Now if you don't have this one, an alternative would be a cadmium red light or a cadmium red, or perhaps something like a vermilion. Now a colour like this is great for mixing nice bright oranges. So we're going to mix it now with the Hansa Yellow and see if we can get a nice orange. So there we are, a nice orange. I could of course mix it as well with my warm yellow and possibly get an even brighter sort of orange. So that's our primaries covered. What about some neutrals and some earth colours? Now this first colour sits almost entirely between being a primary colour and being an earth colour. Technically it's an earth colour, but it's a primary colour too. Let me show you what it is and why you're going to find it very useful in your palette. So I'm now swatching for you yellow ochre. Almost every beginner's set has a yellow ochre in. This one is quite a bright yellow. Some of them are a little duller. Compared to the normal yellows, it is actually always quite a dull colour, it's quite a warm colour, and it's quite a granular colour. There are two main uses for this. It can be used for things like sandy pathways and beaches, maybe a bit too bright. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to pop a little bit of the purple that we made into it earlier, because yellow and purple are colour opposites. So let's put a little bit of that in. Just drop it in there and we can start getting some much more natural colours. So this is one use for it. Another use is to make really, really dull greens. Now, if I were to mix it with ultramarine, which also makes dull greens, I could get an incredibly dull green. So let's mix that straight on the paper. Let's put the ultramarine down. So this is the sort of green that you might mix if you were painting something really dull like a kiwi fruit. And the trick to both botanicals and landscapes is to have a real variety of greens. So you don't want them all to be bright and crazy in your face, but you don't want them all to be dull and boring either. If you can get both, if you can get a good range of bright greens and natural greens, you'll be well on the way to having something that looks really, really complex and interesting and realistic. Now you're going to need some shades of brown in your palette, really useful for both man-made structures and for things like landscapes and tree painting. So I want you to have two versions. I want you to have a warm and a cool. So let's look first at our cool based brown. So the colour I'm swatching for you now is a really weak colour. It's a cool brown and it's called Raw Umber. So you may have burnt umber in your palette, which is a much different animal, much darker. But I actually have included this in my beginner's set because I find it a really, really useful colour. It's fantastic for adding to beach colours. For instance, we can add a little bit to our yellow ochre. So let's try that. and start getting some of those really natural sandy path browns. I can also cool it down by adding a tiny touch of French ultramarine, making some of these beautiful light delicate colours that are very, very suitable for things like tree trunks and pathways. So that cool brown was a really useful colour, but you're also going to need some warmer browns for things like bricks and autumn shades. So let's look now at your options for a warm brown. Now, if you've already bought a set of paints, your warm brown is most likely to be burnt umber, which is kind of a chocolate brown. It's a very nice colour. I've actually chosen burnt sienna for mine because I wanted something a little bit warmer, considering I already had my cool brown with the raw umber. So this is burnt sienna, and you can see what a beautiful colour this is. So I can add some warm yellow to this to make some autumn colours. So let's mix it with my Diarylide Yellow. Look at that for pumpkins and autumn leaves. Beautiful colour. I can also, if I need a stronger, cooler brown, mix it with ultramarine. So let's go in again with the burnt sienna, and then we're going to pop the ultramarine in to cool it down. So the more blue you add, the cooler it will become. So you can have something like this that looks somewhat similar to a burnt umber, or you can keep adding blue until it goes really, really dark and cold, a bit like sepia. So that's our warm neutrals, our browns. What about our cool neutrals, our greys? Now you can actually mix some really, really good neutral greys from your primary colours. However, there's one grey that's really, really useful, and it's included in most beginners sets, including my own. So let's look at that one now. So this is Payne's grey, and it's an incredibly useful colour. So I'm going to swatch it twice actually. I want to show you what it looks like when it's light. It's this beautiful blue based grey. So that's a really useful colour. I can also swatch it dark, and it's a staining colour, so look how dark you can get it. Now this can be used as a replacement for black, because black can be really, really harsh. Now it can be mixed in with other neutrals to cool it down, but the one thing you can do is to use it as a blue, because it's got so much blue pigment in. All greys are a combination of the three primaries with the majority of blue pigment. So this is a very blue based grey, so we can use it like a blue. So what I can do is I can mix it with my pink, and hopefully I can get a really stormy looking purple. So look at that, depending on how much pink I put in, it could be useful for things like aubergines and could also be fabulous for stormy clouds. Now let's try it with some yellow and see if we can make a green. It will of course be a very dark, dull green. So putting the Hansa Yellow in now. And this is actually a really useful colour for painting those natural looking dark trees. So just look at the range of colours we've mixed so far, and we've barely even got started. We've barely even scratched the surface on combining each of these colours with the other. So you can see what a huge range of colours you can get just from these few primaries and neutrals. So do let me know in the comments which of these colours you own, and if you found this video helpful. If you would like more information about the paint set that I used in this video, please do pop into the video description. You'll find a link there so you can have a look at the colours in more detail. So the last colour we spoke about today, the Payne's Grey, I talked about it being a great alternative to black. And black is one of the colours that I do suggest you avoid if you're a beginner. Now there's no such thing as a bad colour or a banned colour before anybody gets annoyed with me. However, there are some colours that I've seen beginners get into trouble with time and time again. So if you'd like my list of 3 colours which I think you should avoid just until you become a little bit more experienced in handling the paint, you can watch that video right now.